Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the Director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue, and finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. Now, today's topic is hope and healing after an abortion. As always, we have a special guest with us today. She has asked that we keep her face and name confidential for reasons that'll be more clear to you once you hear her story. So for this interview, we'll use the name Elizabeth. Welcome, Elizabeth, to the Being Pro-Life series.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So Elizabeth, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, I come from a large, strict Catholic family, good morals, and a good Catholic education that led me to lead a good moral life, so I thought. But, I will start my story as, I was all alone, waiting for the answer to something I already knew the answer to. I was nervous, worried, and most of all frightened. Frightened of the unknown, frightened of what to do next. Frightened because I was only 21 years old and I still had a lot to learn and a lot to live. I didn't need a complication like this right now in my life. What do I tell my parents? What do I tell my friends? Is this a secret to keep to myself? And is this a decision to be making all by myself? I'm here to talk to you about two of my best kept secrets. Secrets that most of my family and friends still do not know. And that's why I prefer to keep my identity hidden, just to maintain that confidentiality until I'm able to share it with all my family and friends. I was your average high school girl. I was a little shy and had a small, close group of friends. I did go to a public high school, while most of my friends did go to a Catholic high school. And I never really had any relationships. I did have your so-called high school sweetheart at 16, but it wasn't anything more than just a peck on the cheek kind of relationship. I was not interested in any sort of sexual relationship. I was truly saving myself for marriage, to be in the Catholic way of life. And then my senior year, I did meet my first boyfriend, but unfortunately there was a side that came out of him that truly scared me. He was very controlling and very jealous. I met him at my place of work at the time. I was a straight A student and I always had very good grades. And unfortunately, because of this boyfriend, my grades did start going down a bit. And I did try to break up with him because I wanted a scholarship for college, knowing that my family wouldn't be able to afford it. So I had to make sure that I had good grades to get to college. But he demanded so much of my time and attention. And unfortunately, he wanted to have a sexual relationship with me all the time. And I fought him every time. And when I would try to break up with him, he'd stalk me and would find where I was. Another reason why I try to keep my identity hidden, because I don't know if he would ever try to find me again. But one time after work, I was unable to fight him anymore. And he ended up date raping me. And I still could not break up with him. And I tried to handle it on my own until one day I did tell my older sister that I can't break up with him. And he's showing up everywhere, my place of work, at school, at my friend's house, and I needed her help. So finally, we were able to, together, get him to quit stalking me. And unfortunately, my first year of college, I found out that I was pregnant in my first quarter. I was in denial. I didn't tell anyone. I probably got pregnant in June or July, that summer right before college began. And my brother was getting married, so I was just in denial. Too many things were going on. And finally, when I did tell my parents, I was about 5 months pregnant. And it was right around Thanksgiving. And this time of year, Thanksgiving has always been hard. And then Christmas, the holidays are always very hard. But the relationship was so volatile, but my parents wanted to make sure I didn't want to marry this man. So I did confront him to tell him I was pregnant. And he threatened to take the baby away from me or fight me in court to say that I was an unfit mother. So I decided to go away and have this baby in hiding, in secret. Nobody was going to know. So the only people who knew at the time were my mom and dad, my older brother and sister, and one other sibling.
Elizabeth, so you came from a good Catholic family. You were in a abusive relationship. They were trying to break up with this man, and he was forcing himself on you sexually. How did your family and parents respond when you told them that you were pregnant? What was that like?
They were very angry
With you?
at me. They had a hard time believing that it had happened, only for the fact that they had tried to tell me he was no good and to break up with him. And when I tried to tell them I did try to break up with him, I did try to do all these things, but he was stalking me, they still didn't believe me until when I left to have the baby in hiding, that he started coming to my parents' house and actually stalking them and my brothers and sisters. And I think then they kind of realized what I was saying, what was going on. And so we knew that having the baby in hiding was the best option, and to place the child for adoption, which is what we ended up doing. And it was probably the best decision, because after I had returned, after having this child, he showed up at my place of work and was showing up at my house again, to the point where I ended up having to move out of my parents' house and living with two of my sisters to avoid him. And it was very hard.
Okay, Elizabeth, so once he started stalking you at your parents' home that forced you to move in with your sisters, did your parents have a better understanding of what he was like, and that were they a little more sympathetic to your situation, or were they still blaming you for being involved with him?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think they were just hurt for the most part that they weren't able to protect me a bit better than what was going on. And so maybe it was misdirected anger. Maybe they were more angry at themselves for not being there for me, or angry that I wouldn't listen to them and wouldn't break up with him, before that point. I've never really talked to my parents more about it. It was kind of like it happened and it didn't exist. After the baby was born, never talked about again. The relationship, never talked about again. Everything. And then when I was being stalked at work, and my father, I called him crying, saying, "What do I do? He doesn't know where I lived. I moved out of your house. What do I do now?" And then I think my dad kind of realized that this was a lot worse than what he originally thought, but never talked about. It's one of those things that you just don't talk about it. And we never have talked about it.
Okay, so how did that part then end? I assume he doesn't still stalk you today. So when did that finally go away?
I'm not sure. I ended up having police officer friends. And so when he found where I lived, I called my police officer friends, and they ended up patrolling where I was living to keep my sisters and I safe. And then pretty soon it just stopped. So I think I was fortunate enough to have friends like that to be there for my well-being. And I never told them the whole story. I just said, I have an ex-boyfriend who keeps finding me and stalking me, and I don't know what to do. And I just asked for their advice. And they said, we will just patrol your street until it goes away. There was no proof and nothing else like that. I couldn't press charges or anything. But then it went away, and he went away. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was a pregnancy that led to placing a child for adoption.
Yes.
So what happened after that?
Well, then I met another man, and, after I had the child, I was 18, 19 years old, and my body changed, and I was in an abusive relationship, and I didn't feel so attractive. I hated myself. I lost my scholarship. What was I going to do with my life? I just had no clue. I really felt that my life was just a mess now. I had no direction. So then I met another man, and he made me feel attractive and made me feel good about myself. And again, another side came out of him. And I learned more about him. I learned that he was living with somebody. I learned that he was a father of another child through this woman he was living with. And I tried to get out of that relationship. And unfortunately, again, when he wanted to have sex, I didn't even fight it. I just got to the point in my life where I thought that's all men wanted. He was the second guy I'd ever been with. I got pregnant again. I confronted him and said that I was pregnant. He said that he would state the child was not his, that I was just a slut. It made me just feel really bad about myself. So he said, you need to have an abortion and I will give you the money for it. And I said, okay. But the day of the appointment, he didn't show up. He had no money, but I still went to the appointment.
At that point, that you weren't happy with the relationship you were in, but when you got pregnant, did you have a hope for what his reaction would be?
I didn't really think about it. All I could think about was that first pregnancy and having to tell my parent that I was pregnant. And I couldn't do that. So nobody knew that I was pregnant. I mean, I didn't think I could place another child for adoption. It was really hard. I connected to that child. When I was at the home for unwed mothers, I prayed the rosary every night for protection over this child. And I prayed to St. Joseph to be the father for this child and Mary to be the mother for the child, because I won't be there. So I prayed so much. I went to Mass every day. And in some ways, I feel like my faith had let me down, because you know what? I wore a scapular every day of my life. And the day that I was date raped, I looked at myself in the mirror with the bruises and my shirt ripped open, and I saw my scapular and I said, I just felt my faith had failed me. It's probably the day I lost my faith, really lost it. But then I regained it when I went to Mass every day and was praying the rosary and all that stuff. And then I meet this guy and all this happens, and I just felt like my faith had failed me again. And so I just did not want to go to the humiliation of telling everybody of my family that I was pregnant again. So I did it all in secret. I told the guy, he said he was going to be there for me. He wasn't. And I just went through the motions. I just did it all myself.
So would you like to share a little bit about the experience of that day that you had that abortion?
Well, my family is very, 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 very pro-life. Even myself when I was younger, had picketed in front of the Planned Parenthood abortion clinic many Saturdays, many times. And I was afraid that my relatives would be there in front of that clinic. So I had kind of made myself look incognito, like they wouldn't recognize me driving up there in my car. And nobody was picketing that day. So it made it easier for myself to go in through the doors. And when you go there, you just go through the motions and no time to really think about what you're doing. So I gave a false name because no one was going to know what I was about to do. And as I was sitting there waiting for the answer of the pregnancy test that they were doing on me, my fright turns to mixed emotions and several things go through my mind. I know what abortion is, and I'm kind of familiar with the different procedures of abortion. So I was thinking, what procedure will they do to me? This was just one of many thoughts that were going through my mind. And while I'm thinking of these, they call my name, and I go see the so-called counselor. The counselor confirms what I already knew and says I have other choices, but never really explains my other choices, just says I have them. But I know what they are because just 2 years earlier, I placed a child for adoption. I tell her this is what I want to do, and off to the waiting room I go. Most abortions are a spontaneous decision. You go to the clinic to find out if you're pregnant, and you just go through the motions and processes. No time to really think about what you're going to do and how it will affect your life. I went back to the waiting room, and as I was sitting there, a lot of commotion is going on through my mind. Kids are running around, TVs are on, and the other women are going through the same process as me. I was becoming distant from reality, becoming someone I thought I would never become. And most of all, I was becoming numb. My name is called again. It is time for the procedure. I do as I am told, although it really isn't me, it's somebody else, because I would never do such a thing. I start crying and tensing up. The procedure is now done. I have now become totally numb, and most of all, I have become non-existent. I can now leave, but it really isn't me. It's somebody else. I go through life as if nothing ever happened until 6 weeks later on Easter Sunday when I almost hemorrhaged. I take it easy for a couple of days, but the fright and horror remains. I've now gone into post-abortion syndrome, but not really. I was in it from the moment I walked through those clinic doors. Abortion leaves emotional scars like depression, anger, regret, remorse, intense feeling of loss, guilt, self-hatred, self-destructive tendencies, suicide, nightmares, inability to forgive yourself, flashbacks of the abortion, and many others. These emotional scars have been identified as post-abortion syndrome, or PAS. Most women have a feeling of relief after an abortion. And it's not until many years later, and that can be 5 or 50, when the men and women start acknowledging these feelings. Abortion is as destructive to men as it is to women. And I think I've experienced all of these scars. I experienced them immediately because I already had some of them from the adoption. I never grieved the loss of my first child, and now I have another loss weighing down on me. I saw and felt the whole procedure, and I remember every detail of that day. The nightmares and flashbacks were just overwhelming. And the sisters that I was living with at the time, they had found the medication that I was using to help clot from the bleeding that was continual. And they said that either you tell mom and dad or we tell mom and dad about the abortion. And so I ended up telling my parents about the abortion, which of course did not go over too well with my family. And they immediately said, you need to go to confession and make yourself right with God. And I remember walking into the church and I was shaking. And I went into the confessional and I sat behind the screen. And I think the only thing that I said was I had an abortion. And the priest had told me that I had done the unforgivable. And I left the confessional crying. And I sat in that pew looking at the crucifix and just cried. And I got up and I did not return to the church.
So you share with the priest that you had an abortion. Mm-hmm. And essentially he says to you, I cannot offer you absolution. You cannot be forgiven.
Yes.
And you walked out of there. Okay. Wow.
I never shared that with anybody. Not even to my family, I just, in my head now, I've committed a mortal sin. I can no longer receive communion. What's the sense of even going to church then if I've done the unforgivable? And with that, I became distant from my family and friends. And I never got in drugs because those are bad for you. But, I drank an awful lot. And
so did your family ask you, did you go? Because they're the ones that asked you to go in the first place. Did they follow up and say what happened?
No, none of it. I wasn't even living at home, and I lived with my sisters, but, they were working and going to school and doing their own things. So my sisters didn't even really follow up to say, what did mom and dad say? It was kind of like, don't talk about it. Just don't talk about it. But the point that my sisters started to talk about it, especially my older sister, was because I became suicidal. And she knew something was going on, and she tried to help as best she could, but I was just in a spiral of self-destruction. I did try to go to confession. I went to several different churches and never got the forgiveness. And
so several priests told you the same thing.
Yeah, they did. And it was, it's just hard because you look at the church and think that it's forgiving and it's always going to be there for you, and you feel let down, and you already feel terrible about yourself from the way these men had treated me. And then it's reconfirmed in a place where you feel safe. Even my family thought of me in a certain way, and I felt alone and ashamed and had nothing worth living for. I didn't have my scholarship anymore. I wasn't in school. Nothing was as I had planned it to be when I was a little girl, of what my dreams were going to be when I grew up. Just wasn't happening that way.
It's certainly more than understandable that after trying to go to confession several times to several different priests at several different churches and always being told you cannot be forgiven, that you would leave the church over that, lose your faith in the church. Most people, I think, would under those same circumstances. You're trying to return and you can't.
And to be in that situation and then to impact these bad relationships with the decision to have an abortion really just made everything worse. And I feel like I let two people down, two people violate me. But with that one experience, I had the guy violate me, and then I had the abortion, two different people violating me and who I was. And I had so many things taken away from me, my pride of getting pregnant again, and then allowing the baby to be terminated. I mean, it really doesn't matter the circumstances of the pregnancy. I mean, when you are pregnant, you have a problem to fix. But to make the decision to have an abortion just creates another problem, and that leads to another and another until your life comes crashing down upon you. You lose all hope and all life in you. Everything I thought I once stood for was gone. The person who I thought I was no longer there. And now I have to identify myself. Who am I? What have I become? Have I become a murderer? Have I done the unforgivable? I went into such a deep depression, and I was really living life recklessly. I had no family and friends. They wanted nothing to do with me because I was so self-destructive. And I really felt I had lost everything and had nothing to live for. I just wanted to die. And my older sister, she had had enough of my self-destructive behavior and took me to a church renewal function. And I believe I've been away from the church for probably 5 years. And after 3 days of her begging me to go to this church renewal, on the third day, I finally said, I will go. And she knew the priest and his family, and she really wanted me to go there. So I did. And I was very moved by the priest there, who was Father Jim Willick. And the topic that night was forgiveness. And I cried the whole time during his whole talk. It just touched me deeply. And my sister said, look, he's over there by himself. You need to go over there and talk to him. And he's never by himself. But for some reason that night, he was truly by himself in a dark area. And I went over to him and I was just crying. And I whispered to him that I was a murderer. And he said, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to picture somebody walking up to you. I want you to picture that person holding something. That's Jesus, and he's holding your baby. I want you to take your baby from him, and I want you to hold your baby to your heart. That was the first time I had ever felt forgiveness, true forgiveness from God. And that evening, he had told me about another priest to get counseling from. And so I did that. And then that priest told me about a new program within the Archdiocese called Project Rachael. And it was brand new, but I called and hung up, called and hung up. And my sister finally said, either you call and leave a message if nobody answers, or I will. So I finally did call and left a message, and I attended the very next retreat. And I was fortunate enough to meet another priest that was there, Father Rick Marshauser, who had been very instrumental in me returning back to the church. He heard a true confession. I told him my whole story and my anger about the church, and he just helped me through it all. He attended several retreats and became very much a spiritual advisor for me to get back to the church. And when I was telling him my story, he never rushed me. He just listened and answered my questions as best he could. And at the healing service that evening, when he put his hands on my head and I looked up at him, I truly felt that I was seeing the face of Jesus there healing me. And a blessing came over me, so powerful and so unforgettable. I will never forget that image. And when I have a bad day, I just think of that. And sometimes I'll just sit in church and I'll just think of that moment, and I all of a sudden will feel this weight on my head. And I truly feel the presence of Jesus there, because I have really hard days. Thanksgiving is hard, and Christmas is hard, and Easter Sunday was always very hard. I know the days of when I had the abortion, that date, it's all very hard. And so I make it a point to go to Mass on those days. But I always somehow feel the presence there from that day of that healing service.
Is it a common thing for people who are post-abortive to struggle with Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter in particular, or why was it that that's a particular struggle for you?
Well, for me, it's because Thanksgiving time was when I told my parents that I was pregnant the first time.
Okay.
And right after Christmas, I left to go to the home until I had the baby. And then with the abortion, Easter Sunday being the day that I was hemorrhaging, and I had to go and get a prescription to stop the bleeding. That day, it was very scary for me. I even saw a picture of me that day. I was so gray. I was losing so much blood. But there are anniversary dates that we consider. And I always mention, like, I wouldn't go to the dentist because the suction of cleaning my teeth was the same sound of the abortion.
Wow.
I wouldn't go and have a gynecological appointment because I just wasn't comfortable, because the last time I went to one was to have an abortion. Running a vacuum cleaner, hearing the sound and the suction of the vacuum cleaner or anything like that, that noise triggered anger in me, or crying. And I found out through my healing journey, other women, same thing. And when you share that and they're going, oh my gosh, that's why I don't go to the dentist. That's why I didn't run the vacuum cleaner. And we share these things with each other, as saying, I'm not alone. I felt the same way. I had that same thing. And we just help each other along the journey and share our experiences. But everybody's anniversary dates are different on what will trigger an emotional situation.
Right. So you ran into Father Jim Willick. By the way, if our listeners don't know, Father Jim Willick was a well-known priest in our archdiocese, but he passed away of cancer several years ago, very young, frankly. So he was involved with Project Rachael back at its inception here in this archdiocese. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about the good that Project Rachael, which is a post-abortion healing ministry, recognized by the USCCB and here in this archdiocese of Cincinnati, how it is that has been helpful to you?
Well, both of my pregnancies were the result of abusive relationships. First boyfriend violently took something I held so precious and really wanted to give my husband. And Project Rachael has helped me cope with that. There are other women who've been in abusive relationships and gotten pregnant. So it's been helpful having women with that same experience. It's helped me find healing and forgiveness, and not just from God, but from myself. I'm not a bad person. I made a bad decision, and it doesn't need to define who I am. And it helped me realize that I needed to heal from the adoption first, to grieve the loss of that child before I could even begin to grieve the loss of the child from abortion. To carry a child for 9-10 months and to just let it go is very difficult. And I did it secretly. No one knew. And so it's a secret I've held all these years. Still not many people know. So it's very hard to carry that every day. But I knew I had to do it. I feared for my baby's life as well as my life. But it is a more loving and memorable decision. And I say placed my baby for adoption because I never gave him up. I thought about him all the time and have the memory of him crying and watching him being weighed and holding him and singing to him and loving him the best I could. And I got to know that he was an answer to someone's prayers who could never have a child of their own and so desperately wanted to start a family. And I gave him that gift. They were priceless memories. And then I have the opposite memory of terminating my pregnancy, taking that gift away from me and the world, never truly knowing if the baby was a boy or girl, no burial, no closure for that loss. Another family could have had the same opportunity to raise a child they so desperately wanted, but I didn't do it. I was scared and ashamed, and I didn't think I can go through an adoption process all over again to say goodbye to another child. But how very wrong I was. And now that memory does haunt me because life has moments of bringing back unwanted memories. I unfortunately had a tubal pregnancy, which could have been a result of the abortion. And I had to terminate that pregnancy. And the flashbacks from years ago of that abortion came rushing back on me. And I thought that God was punishing me for the abortion. But thank God I was on my healing journey, and I had priests involved with Project Rachael who were there for me that I could talk to and say, am I being punished? Why is this happening to me? And to help me see that God is not that way.
All right, so let's take a moment to share with everyone how you can learn more about Project Rachael. So I'm going to share this screen first. This is, by the way, if you go to www.catholiccincinnati.org/project-Rachael, then you will find our Project Rachael page here at the Archdiocese. Right up here at the top, you can see some of the things that are offered by Project Rachael. What would you recommend someone to come to first? Someone who has been affected by an abortion.
I would look at the retreats and the support groups. It depends upon where they are in their journey and how they can commit to starting their healing journey. The support groups are over a period of time. The retreats are usually a Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday, ending Sunday right around lunchtime. Then you can go from a retreat to a support group or support group to a retreat. They go hand in hand like that. But for me, I went and did the retreat first. And I just felt a whole weekend was very beneficial for me. But it depends upon what you are able to do with your life circumstances.
Okay, so what's the difference between the retreat and the day of reflection then?
The day of reflection, really anyone can go to the day of reflection. That is for fathers of the child, grandparents of the child, whoever is connected to that child that was aborted. And there is a small prayer service, and nobody really knows if you had the abortion or if you're just there in support of somebody and you're just there to reflect on it. So it's still confidential in a way, because I think that's the biggest thing. Women aren't going to publicly go out there and say, I had an abortion. It's usually always kept a secret, and that confidentiality needing to be there until we're able to deal with it. And so the day of reflection is open to anybody that can go there, and nobody has a clue if you're one who had one or not. Right. And then the retreat is a whole weekend. Again, you get there Friday evening around dinner time, all day Saturday, and then you leave Sunday right around lunchtime. Again, confidential. No one knows where you are at this retreat. We do try to respect the women's privacy and wanting confidentiality, because most likely they've ever told anyone that they've had an abortion and they need to deal with this on their own before they can openly share it with others.
So when you register for this retreat, you can even see on the website that it tells you the general area. If you can't read this, certainly on the podcast, you obviously cannot read this. The upcoming dates in 2019 are March 22nd through 24th. It says Dayton, and then on October 25 through 27 in Cincinnati. So you are told the general area so that you know basically how far away it is, but the specific location is not told to the public. That's just one piece of how Project Rachael keeps these things confidential. So no one even knows where these things are held. And then after you register, then you are told where to go, of course. But if you're wondering, I want to register, but I want to know where it is, you can find out when you register by calling that number or just registering online for the retreat. Day of reflection, of course, dates are here as well. November of 2018 and February of 2019. Again, that is for anyone affected in any way by abortion, men and women, grandparents, siblings, whoever it might be. Now, the support groups, are those only to post-abortive women?
Yes, they are, but they go over a period of time. So you will speak with somebody with regards to the support group and how you can do the support group on your schedule. And then some people might not be ready for any of that, but they just need to talk to somebody. And so there are several women involved with Project Rachael who are willing to do one-on-one meetings, just talking over the telephone. Because once you start sharing your story, the healing begins. And you can share it again and again and again. And the healing gets easier and easier every time you share it. So that is always helpful too. And I believe also there are counselors available in case you want to do that avenue.
Right. So if you call this local helpline, 513-784-0531, particularly for those listening to the podcast, of course, you can find that at the address I already gave, catholiccincinnati.org/project-Rachael. Or again, it's 513-784-0531. If you call that number, you could speak to a post abortive woman if you just need to speak with someone, or they can refer you to a professional counselor, or they can refer you to a priest who has gone through Project Rachel training, who would be ready and available to either talk to you or for the sacrament of confession, who we know will not turn you away and tell you that you cannot be forgiven. They will speak with you and offer you the forgiveness through the sacrament and through Jesus Christ and his church. So also on this website, to finish the rest of this, you can find some other resources here. If you click on this resources link up at the top, or if you can't see that, there is a resources link, and it takes you down to the bottom of the page where you can find the brochures that you can print out, or some flyers with tear-off tabs. That is a flyer that gives people the number of Project Rachel, and people just rip the number off of it. They're also available in Spanish. Also on these resources, you can find bulletin announcements. So if you're with a parish and you just want people to know about Project Rachel, there's bulletin announcements here. There's also a little bit of information about Cemetery of the Innocent guidelines. What that means is there are some parishes that like to, particularly either in October, Respect Life Month, or maybe January at the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, the church might put up white crosses representing the number of abortions that have been had in a year or whatever time period they're working with. And if a parish does that, we strongly encourage them to also put up a large banner about Project Rachel and gives the phone number, so that anyone driving by, any woman affiliated with abortion that drives by those crosses, knows that this church also welcomes people to return and get hope and healing from that, so they can return to the church.
I'd like to share something with regards to the white crosses.
Yes.
For post-abortive women, that is very painful to see on the lawns. Once you drive by, it's a shock to their system. And some women will not go that pathway again until those crosses are gone. Some of them won't even go to church there with those crosses because it's an obstacle. It's a barrier to not go there. And from my own experience, my children asked what they were for. And I told them. My older child had said, "Oh, Mom, but you would never do such a thing." And I almost cried. And I responded, "Well, you would think that." And then now that they're a bit older, my children have asked about the crosses. And I always say to them, you need to pray for the men and women carrying those crosses for the rest of their life. I tell them that cross looks so small in the ground and so light, but it is really big and heavy for the many people carrying it around silently. And even my children now have said, "Can we help set up the crosses?" And for me, my children don't know my story. It's hard for me to say, "No, we can't." Well, why not? And maybe one of these days I will tell them, but those crosses mean a lot more. And for me, I ache a bit because I just think they're hammering the cross of one of their siblings. And I think those banners are huge for someone like me, because if you see the crosses, but then you see hope and healing with those crosses, it's a beautiful sign to say, yeah, you carry that cross, but come on in. There's hope and healing here. And It's no longer one of those crosses in the ground there, maybe a bad thing, but more of a hopeful thing.
If you're watching this on the video, this is what the banner looks like. We have 5 or 6 of these banners in the Respect Life office available for loan that look just like this. So Project Rachel, Hope and Healing After Abortion, has our phone number and has the email address. I think they're like 10 feet by 4 feet. So any parish that wants to borrow one for as long as we have them, we only have 6, you can call the number right there, the Project Rachel page that we've given out, 784-0531, and they can refer you to our office to schedule this banner. Or I can send you this file if you email projectrachel@catholiccincinnati.org, or this address here, hopeandhealingcincy@gmail.com. Either way, we can arrange for you to borrow one of these banners, or I can send you the file and you can print up your own banner. If you're a large parish and you can afford to make your own, that would be terrific as well. And then finally, up here again on the website, if you're interested in getting involved with Project Rachel, if you go back to the website we mentioned already, catholiccincinnati.org/project-rachel, And at the top, if you just want to support this ministry, then up at the top, there's a donate button, and you can click here and you can donate online directly to Project Rachael. And what that money will do is it'll help provide scholarships for people to attend these retreats or day of reflections, especially retreats. Or it can go towards buying more banners to be loaned out to parish. It can even go to parishes and people ask for free flyers at times. It pays for all those sorts of things towards Project Rachael Ministry. It is run by volunteers, so that's where your money goes if you're able to donate. Okay, now it doesn't say up here on the website, but another thing that is offered by Project Rachael is the women involved are happy to come to parishes or to high schools and give a talk to share part of their journey that is appropriate for a parish or appropriate for a high school group to hear. They've been to several high schools in the area, but if you're affiliated with a high school or you're a parent and you want to encourage the women of Project Rachael to share their stories in religion class or something like that, then we'd be happy to do that. Again, you can call that line or you can send an email to projectrachael@catholiccincinnati.org. And you can find these email addresses or our office phone number on this website, and we can schedule someone to come out and talk at your parish or high school as well. Elizabeth, do you have anything else you want to share that we didn't cover that is offered by Project Rachael Ministry for people who are affected by abortion?
No, I just want to say that the support group, we don't feel alone. There are other women who've experienced the same things that I have and have the same feelings. We are there for one another, and that's how the healing begins. I felt so alone and so ashamed, and I no longer had the will to live. Without Project Rachael, I don't know where I would be right now. I have returned to the church, and I do witnesses and share it on this interview to help continue my healing journey, but also to help others begin their journey. I'm not here for pity or sympathy because the decisions made were ultimately mine. I'm here to help you understand the pain and scars left from the decision of having an abortion. I know what it's like to take life, and I know what it's like to give life. The atmosphere of giving life is much happier and easier to heal from than the atmosphere of taking life. Mother Teresa has been quoted as saying, "America needs no words from me to see how Roe versus Wade has deformed a great nation. The so-called right to abortion has pitted mothers against their children and women against men. It has portrayed the greatest of gifts, a child, as a competitor, an intrusion, and an inconvenience." You see, we all are victims of abortion. Every baby who dies in an abortion has a mother, father, grandparents, a whole family whose life are connected to that little life. And each one of those people is affected by abortion's tragedy in some way. Too many women are out there suffering silently, as well as men, from their abortion. And so I do ask, when you pray for the children lost to abortion, please remember to pray for the women, men, parents, and grandparents affected by abortion too.
Right. Thank you, Elizabeth. So there's probably two main audiences we might want to leave some closing messages for. So for people who have not been affected, or at least aren't aware anyway, of anyone in their lives affected by abortion, what message do you might have for them on how to be more aware and sensitive to the needs of people who have been affected?
You never know who you're sitting next to. Sometimes I feel so inclined to share my story with somebody, and I don't know why, and all of a sudden that person starts crying and says to me, "I had an abortion." And that happens more often than I would like to hear, quite honestly. So you could be on the bus, you could be anywhere, and that person next to you could have had an abortion. And any derogatory thing that you could say about abortion, or how could somebody even do that, or just the words that you say in that respect, you're going to make that person go into a deeper depression that they're probably in a deeper shell, might become more disconnected from you because they think you're judging them. I think it's really important that you speak to it in more of if somebody can get forgiveness from this. Gosh, if I ever found out somebody did that, I hope I could help them heal from it and help them move on. And I think that's really important. And if somebody does share it with you, be compassionate and just listen. Give them your time. No words really need to be spoken except for, "Oh my gosh, what a cross you've had to bear," or "Wow, what you've had to been through in your life." Because we never know how we would react if we're in a situation that way. So I think it's really important that we use more words of compassion and being there for somebody rather than saying, oh, what an awful person they are for doing that.
Okay, Elizabeth, are there now, obviously, for anyone who has been affected by an abortion in some way, whether they're considering an abortion right now or if they've already had one, what closing thoughts do you have to say to them?
The most important thing is to find somebody who can help you along your journey and get that healing begun. Like you had mentioned, going to a priest is always helpful, but going to a Project Rachael priest, know that you can trust them. The hardest thing is to be able to trust somebody. Sometimes you feel like you're walking around with the scarlet letter A, and everybody's looking at you, knows that you have had an abortion because you have that scarlet letter on your forehead. And so I think it's important to find somebody to share your story, because once you start talking about it, the healing really does begin. And I probably have 3 very good priests that help me along my journey. And it's a spiritual guidance that you need, as well as the emotional guidance that the support group of Project Rachael can offer. So I really feel it's important to share your story with somebody you trust. It's where it really needs to begin. And again, if you are not post-abortive and somebody confides in you, it's a great thing that they did, because they obviously trust you and trust your relationship and know that you won't judge them and you will be there for them and willing to listen to them. And I think that's just as important, to be that sounding board and not criticize them, not judge them on anything they have to say, just listen.
Right. Thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing your story with us today, taking some time with us today and helping us to understand more of the journey of post-abortion healing and ministry, and how it is that we need to be better equipped to reach out to those who need hope and healing. Again, it's at CatholicCincinnati.org/project-Rachael. I thank you for the courage that you have had to share your story with us today and for being a part of this monthly blog. Have a great day, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.